So Article 38 would allow basically two family units to go into the R0 and R1 zones, the single family zones in Arlington, and thus it would make those two zones into two family zones. A year ago, Arlington allowed accessory apartments, ADUs, to be put into single family or two family zones. So potentially we're talking about adding not just two units to the single family zones, we're talking about resulting in 3 or 4 units in our zones. Article 38 was proposed 2 years ago, and it did fail at that time because it did not meet the goal that the proponents said it should do, which was to improve our affordability, to improve our diversity or our housing stock diversity, or to improve our climate resiliency and our open space. Article 38, though, unfortunately, was approved on April 4th of this year by the ARB. And at that time, the proponents basically said all they wanted to do was make housing choice. Housing choice at a higher price, basically, is what we're talking about now. So I'd like to talk, first of all, about what Arlington already is. See the little 4A on my presentation there. Arlington actually has been doing a very good job for communities of its size, of its type, even in the whole state. You probably have heard we are the second most dense town in all of Massachusetts. And I believe we're the 11th most dense community if you include cities, obviously much denser generally than we are. We're the 11th most dense community. Despite what you may have heard about this helping the diversity of our homes by knocking down single families or getting rid of them otherwise to allow two families, we are a diverse town in terms of the housing stock. We have just 39, or if you look at it a slightly different way, 38% of our total housing stock in single family homes. And actually there are 645 still remaining single family homes in the two family R2 districts. The other thing I would tell you is that, especially during the Black Lives Matter discussions that came out a year or two ago, and since then, there have been a lot of questions about equity and fairness in how communities make housing available to people that aren't as well off as we are, or perhaps people who are retiring, people of color, people on fixed incomes, people even like we are, middle or perhaps a little lower middle income. In all these areas, Arlington has been doing a good job. Arlington never had so-called redlining in its zoning laws. Arlington is a place that by its bylaws today is doing the right thing. We have small lot sizes. 5,000 to 6,000 feet is the general size of a lot here. If you talk about a town that is not inclusive, you're going to find minimum 2 acres types of rules or minimum X acres. We are so dense that if we add more density, it increases the cost to these people that would live here. It increases the cost to the taxpayers who are already here. It increases the property taxes around properties that are knocked down to make two family houses. So it makes us more exclusive because it becomes more expensive to stay and the housing prices go up, so it's more expensive to move here. Finally, as you can imagine, not all our houses are maxed out to what could be built on these 5,000 to 6,000 square foot R1 lots. If we put in two family zoning by right in place of single family zoning, there will be a mass movement of developers to buy up the cheapest houses first, and then slowly your house, and then the nicer houses, and then the really nice single family houses, and max out the shape of the new structures. One of the proponents of the current Article 38 said that she just really wanted to see, instead of McMansions going up, she wanted to see two family units going in instead. Well, the two family units would be at least as McMansion-y, and the pricing of the units would be much higher than what they replace. So there are some real problems in that. And in fact, I'm going to take you on to the next slide, which you can see at tm.arfr.org. So Article 38 would have a couple of changes, but I want you to remember they would not have a change to improve affordability. They would not have a change to bringing people who deserve to come but don't have the money otherwise. Those people would be pushed away. The intent of the proponent is housing choice, but every time a single family house in Arlington, every time that house was knocked down to make two family houses, the price always went up of each individual unit. And you can see this in your neighborhood. On my street, I live on Edge Hill Road, a $950,000 house that had 2 units was replaced by a developer that does a lot of the replacements here. And the $950,000 house was turned into 1 unit for 1.4 million and 1 unit for 1.3 million. It would have been better off for either of those buyers to have the $950,000 house. So another thing that happened, and you can research this further, is that the ARB asked for supporting information this time, perhaps to justify why they were approving what 2 years ago they rejected. The proponent didn't provide supporting information on what would happen to things like our services, our infrastructure, our schools, the effect on traffic. All of these things are left for you to simply say, oh, this is about making choice for people at a higher price point, which basically means not you, because you already live here, people at a higher income who don't live here. And when they move in, you can expect your cost of living to go up and the town to be less inclusive. This is a list of recent sales. I believe this goes back several years. This is every single family that's allowed in the 2-family areas that was knocked down to make the 2 units you see. And what always happened was that you would have been better off coming into Arlington if you could afford it and buying the single family that was there. By the time the developer had, of course, got their profit motive in and built a market rate house, the new units individually cost you more or much more than what was there before. So what do? Arlington has a situation going on that is like everywhere else, prices are increasing at the moment. Density, because it's so high, means that if we add further to that in Arlington, it's going to push at the prices worse than if people were to try living in the less dense towns. We've heard from the governor and various organizations outside of Arlington that they would like to see a large number of homes put in. Another point is along the unintended consequences line that is concerning when major changes are made. For example, 250 people are being asked to decide the fate of thousands of people who live not just in single family housing, but of thousands of people who live in the 2-family zones or in apartment buildings and might eventually like to stay in Arlington in the school systems and move to single family. That's like me. I grew up in this town, couldn't afford to live in a single family zone originally, was lucky enough to move to a 2-family zone when my wife and I decided to move back to Arlington in the late 90s. And then after 10 years of working hard, I was able to move to a single family zone and keep my kid in the same school district in Arlington Public Schools and stay in the town that, although I hated it as a teenager, I grew to love as a resident. So talking about those unintended consequences, we should be very careful as town meeting members about voting for those thousands of people. That's not on the screen. I just wanted to mention that when we're only 250, we should let them decide this. But the unintended consequence on the screen here is that an amendment has been proposed by a member of the ARB to limit the dwelling size, the livable size of these 2-family units that we're being asked to swallow on the single family zones to, I believe it's 1,850 or possibly 1,875 square feet of living space. And as some of you have already said, and I suspect many of you already live in, houses like yours and mine are often below that, and they're not really that startery. And even if your house is a starter home, good for you for living in it still and having a very cost-effective investment over these years. My house is in the 1,700 range. And as you can imagine, building 2 of your house on a lot 5,000 to 6,000 feet, even if it's limited to 1,850 living feet, is going to make the largest house in your neighborhood that you can imagine. It's not a real limitation. And even if the limitation might help for the R0, the larger family plots, of which there aren't that many, there is now the ability to add in single and 2-family zones an ADU, a 900 square foot accessory apartment, and the parking for that, and the whole thing, you know, some private space and that sort of thing, I guess, so that we're talking about really enormous structures, even if they are limited to any living size. So we would ask you to not accept the Trojan horse of saying, it ain't that bad to have 2-family because we're going to limit it. It would still be enormous. And another point is that even with an amendment to limit size of 2-family, we're still being asked to swallow two-family large structures going in with the people that will come, the effect on services, traffic, our schools, our infrastructure, with the effect of tree loss, the loss of embodied energy by knocking down buildings. A huge amount of waste happens when you see a house torn down that could have been insulated and remodeled. And instead, that house goes to the ground. It gets stuck in the ground. Very little of it will get recycled. Lack of endorsement. There is a thing called the master plan. The master plan was put together a few years ago, and it's a great document that talks about how Arlington can be great and stay great, how it can be affordable, how it can be a place to age in place, how it can be welcoming to couples and singles, how it can be cool, and how it can also be suburban and have elements of urban with transit and transport. Unfortunately, that master plan's implementation committee has voted no action on Article 38. They do not think that this is in keeping with our town's plan for itself. I would also add that the town really needs your input to tell them not to do this, because the town is confused about it. We have a housing production plan that improperly calls for some of these things, and the select board voted in favor of it, saying that while it had bad elements like this, it also had some good elements, and it really needs to be rewritten.